What it do, YouTube? This your man, G. Lewis, and welcome to The Sip. Today, I'm in the beautiful coastal town of Biloxi, Mississippi, where I will be covering a story about one of Mississippi's natives. Now, I know my channel mostly deals with history as it pertains to Black Mississippians and their contributions to this great state and to America's culture, but I had to make an exception in this case. This individual I'm going to talk about contribute in a significant way to Black culture in America. He was a screenwriter, or still is a screenwriter. He wrote for one of the biggest Hollywood actors of all time, none other than Eddie Murphy. A white guy in his early 30s, teamed up with Eddie Murphy and became a screenwriter that created some of the largest box office hits in Murphy's career. I'm talking about Nutty Professor, Coming to America 1 and 2, and Boomerang. All three movies that I really love. And he grew up right here in Biloxi, Mississippi. And his name is David Sheffield. And I'm going to take you around and talk a little bit about David Sheffield and his contributions to Black cinema. So if you're ready, let's go.
Welcome to The Sip, where the South sings.
Very few people would have thought that a white guy from Biloxi, Mississippi, in his early 30s, would move to New York City, land a job with Saturday Night Live, and in 3 years go from being a staff writer to being the supervisor and the director of that department. And not only that, he would also become a creative partner to the biggest iconic film and comedian of the 80s, none other than Eddie Murphy. Now, how did such an oddball matchup come to be? Well, in this video, I intend to shed light on the story. During the 1980s, Eddie Murphy was the biggest box office draw in the industry, with hits like 48 Hours, Coming to America, and Beverly Hills Cop. He solidified himself as a bona fide superstar in Hollywood. But prior to making a big splash in Hollywood, Murphy was making a name for himself on the small screen at Saturday Night Live. You remember the James Brown hot tub skit? But that was created by David Sheffield. What about some of the Mr. Robinson episodes? Also David Sheffield. So when Murphy's career began to take off and he left Saturday Night Live for the big lights and the big screen in Hollywood, Sheffield and his writing partner did the same. They moved to LA and they wrote Coming to America for Eddie Murphy. Now that movie did big at the box office. It also solidified Murphy as a Hollywood go-to actor. David Sheffield's father was a teacher. He said he recalled his childhood as something of a nomadic lifestyle. Every couple of years, his father would pick up, move to another little small town in Mississippi, and he would teach there for several years. And then he would pack the family back up, and they would move to another location. They moved all around the state, eventually landing over in Alabama and down in Pensacola, Florida. I believe Sheffield was 13 years old when he landed in Biloxi, and that's where he spent his formative years growing up. While at Biloxi High, Sheffield had mentioned that he wanted to eventually get into writing for television and film. When he graduated high school, Sheffield went off to Ole Miss, where he graduated. Then he moved back down to the University of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg, where he also obtained a degree. While he was going to school at Hattiesburg, he also worked for the local television station, WDAM. He was a news reporter. He said that he always had a comedic slant to the stories that he was covering. So it's always been in his blood. And here's another caveat for you. His brother also was a writer. In fact, he worked on In Living Color. Both guys end up working with two of the biggest Black entertainer moguls in Hollywood. And they both grew up right here in Biloxi, Mississippi. I'm currently standing here in Gulfport, Mississippi. But we're about to head 12 miles that way to Biloxi. So let's get going. As I drove towards Biloxi, I had to ask why. Why did Eddie Murphy, one of the biggest stars of his time, choose to work so closely with a writer from Mississippi, a place with a history so far removed from the Black culture that Eddie grew up in? Murphy definitely had options. He could have worked with writers who spoke his language and came from the same world that he did, but instead he chose to lock in with David Sheffield. Was it about skill? Of course, but Hollywood has plenty of skilled writers. Was it about vision? Maybe, but I think it was about more than that. Maybe Eddie saw something deeper. Maybe he saw that great storytelling isn't about where you come from. It's about what you can bring to the table. He knows that humor, when it's real and authentic, everyone can relate to it. Maybe Eddie knew that sometimes the most unexpected collaborations create the most unforgettable moments. This is Biloxi High. This is where David Sheffield got inspired to become a writer for television and for film. I believe he was a student here between 64 and 67. If you think about that, that was during segregation in Mississippi. Although Brown versus the Board of Education had been passed in 1953, Mississippi still had segregated schools. So when David Sheffield was a student here at the time, it was only whites who attended this school. Interesting, to say the least for me, that Eddie Murphy would team up with a guy who grew up in segregated South, formulate a friendship that would make both men very successful and wealthy. I met David Sheffield, I believe it was in 2006, maybe 2007. His son was the executive chef at a restaurant here in town. I told him that I wanted to meet his father because I was a big fan of his work. David came into the kitchen quietly. He come up to my workstation, told him I was a fan of his work with Eddie Murphy. He seemed, down to earth, very humbled by that. He went on to share with me that he was on his way to Miami to pitch an idea to Will Smith. See, because Will Smith and Martin Lawrence was working on the sequel to Bad Boys. And he said he was about to get aboard his catamaran boat that he had parked out in the harbor. They want to sail down to Miami. That was the only time that I met David Sheffield. Like I said, he seemed like a good guy, humble, down to earth. So I could see someone like Eddie Murphy from Brooklyn, New York, someone who is brash, unapologetically himself, working with somebody like David Sheffield. I could see how that could work out because from what I've seen, the guy is very humble and kind of down to earth. But this is the school that he attended. It is now an elementary school, but at the time it was a high school. But here is where he said that in the High Tide, which was the name of the newspaper for the high school, that he had said that he wanted to become a writer for television and film. So he went on to succeed at his dreams and aspirations. Since retiring from Hollywood, David Sheffield has moved back to Mississippi in Jones County, where he owns a horse farm. He still writes, and from time to time, his plays are put on around the state of Mississippi. The story of David Sheffield led to the contributions of Black cinema and Black culture. Somehow, he was able to connect and create a synergy with a young Eddie Murphy, and that synergy has created some beautiful work. David Sheffield's story is worthy of highlighting because his work with Eddie Murphy is Black culture, and in that being, it's sip culture. Decades later, coming to America, Boomerang and the Nutty Professor still makes us laugh. Those characters and stories didn't originate with just one man, one culture, or one experience. They emerged from an unexpected partnership founded on respect, talent, and creative synergy that transcends race, region, and beyond history. After graduating from Biloxi High, he went on to Ole Miss University. And upon graduation from Ole Miss, he went to the University of Southern Mississippi. After he graduated from the University of Southern Mississippi, he moved to New York City, where he landed a job at Saturday Night Live. In 1980 is when he got that gig. And in 3 years, he was the head writer at Saturday Night Live. But this is where he had pulled his boat into the harbor. Spent the day with his son here. Worked at the restaurant. After that, he and his wife got aboard their catamaran and they headed down to Miami. David Sheffield's contribution to Black culture cannot be denied. Come on, man. Boomerang, one of my favorite movies. Nutty Professor, come on. And Coming to America, 1 and 2. These films, this guy contributed to. A white guy who went to school in segregated Mississippi, Biloxi, went on to work with one of Hollywood's elite talents. And he grew up right here. Years ago, they did a sequel to Coming to America. This time the film was made down at Tyler Perry Studios in Atlanta. But he said it felt like a coming home to get back with the old crew. James Earl Jones, John Amos, which James Earl Jones is from Mississippi as well. And he shared some stories about sitting around with James Earl Jones doing the first reading of the original Coming to America. So yeah, he said it felt like a coming home when they did Coming to America Part 2. As someone from the SIP, learning all of this, I can't help but to wonder how many times have I allowed my assumptions to prevent me from seeing what's possible? And how often have you examined someone from a different world and thought, nah, we ain't got nothing in common? When in reality, that person might be the missing link that you need to do something legendary. See, Eddie Murphy and David Sheffield, they didn't allow their differences to stop them. They leaned into them. And because of that, they didn't just make movies, they made classics. And that right there may be the real lesson here. I'm G. Lewis, and until my next video, take care of yourselves. And fam, always take care of your people. God bless.